Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus, Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, commonly referred to as the five good emperors of Rome. These five men ruled the Roman Empire in succession from 96 AD to 180 AD, and in the words of the 18th century historian Edward Gibbon, who popularised the term, under their leadership the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power under the guidance of wisdom and virtue. In characterizing the rule of these five emperors, he wrote that, quote, "If a man were called upon to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus, the two emperors before and after, the five good emperors." This period of 84 years is generally regarded as the empire's height of prosperity, at least post-Augustus, maintaining the golden age of Pax Romana, during which a state of relative peace, order, stability, hegemonic power, and sustained Roman imperialism and expansion, which started with the reign of Augustus Caesar and came to an end after the reign of the last good emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD. So in this video, we will be analysing who the five good emperors were, their achievements, their legacy, and what impact they left on the empire. And as we're going along, we'll have a think whether they were personally responsible for this success and the accompanying prosperity enjoyed throughout the empire at the time, or whether they were simply beneficiaries of the Pax Romana. Nerva became Roman Emperor on the 18th of September 96 AD after the assassination of the previous Emperor Domitian, who had conducted an autocratic reign of terror in his final years. Nerva was a member of a distinguished senatorial family distantly related to the Julio-Claudian house of Augustus. He had previously served twice as consul before becoming emperor, and during his reign a number of elder statesmen came out of retirement to aid in the governing of the empire after the horrors of the Domitian years, especially horrific for the Senate. Though Nerva only governed for 2 years until his death in 98 AD, his reign was stabilising and crucial in seeing the successful dismantling of the almost terrorist means through which Domitian had imposed his tyranny, and was especially important in preventing the outbreak of a civil war throughout the empire. Nerva was also an ally to the poorest in Roman society, repealing some unpopular and burdensome taxes and introducing some welfare programs that helped to ease economic and social tensions throughout the empire, as well as providing land to veterans and the urban poor, aiding victims of natural disasters, providing financial assistance to impoverished citizens, and introducing agrarian reforms in an effort to increase agricultural production. His system of alimenta also established trusts for the maintenance of poor children in Italy, though many believe this was the work of his close colleague and successor Trajan behind the scenes. According to written sources at the time, including the historian Cassius Dio, Nerva sought to establish a more balanced relationship between the emperor and the Senate, which had become dangerously skewed in favour of imperial overreach. He consulted the Senate on important matters and actions, and did not engage in widespread persecution of specific groups like the Christians, as some of his predecessors had done. But perhaps Nerva's most significant contribution, and most important for the stability of the empire indeed, was adopting Trajan as his successor, who I previously mentioned became close to him. Trajan was a skilled military official, governor of Upper Germany, and an ally of the Roman army. This decision to adopt him came after a revolt by the Praetorian Guard, essentially forcing him to adopt an heir, and after some deliberation, Nerva chose Trajan, deemed acceptable to both the army commanders and the Senate. Nevertheless, this choice crucially helped ensure that there was a smooth and peaceful transfer of power, meaning that even the Roman Empire achieved something that the United States didn't in January 2021. The second good Roman emperor, Trajan, is considered one of the greatest in all of Roman history, coming to power on the 27th or 28th of January 98 AD and ruling until the year 117 AD. Almost immediately, Trajan deified Nerva and included him in his full imperial title, and under Trajan the Roman Empire reached the peak of its territorial expansion. He conquered Dacia, now part of Romania, an incredible campaign commemorated by Trajan's column in Rome, as well as decisively defeating Rome's old enemy, the Parthians, annexing Armenia and northern Mesopotamia as Roman territory and strengthening defences along the northern frontier as well. But Trajan was not simply another emperor general. He also enacted hugely impactful domestic policies that reforged the strength of imperial jurisdiction. He reformed the legal system and provincial administration, enacted laws that improved the status of slaves, forbade the use of informers, and carried out no treason trials during his rule. Trajan also kept a respectful balance of power with the Senate, finding competent and honest officials to govern the Roman provinces and strengthening senatorial authority. He also weakened the power of the Praetorian Guard, executing those who had threatened Nerva previously, and ordered Christians to be not sought out simply for being Christian, though there were still some persecutions under him. Trajan continued Nerva's legacy, though, of public welfare, granting cash and increasing the number of the poor who could be eligible to receive free grain. He also began a massive program of infrastructure development, including building public works, bridges, harbours and aqueducts, alongside extending the tax reductions and welfare programs, especially the policies to aid poor children, the ones that are widely believed to be forged by him under his predecessor. His vast domestic reforms and administrative competence brought him acclaim from many, including the Church and Pope Gregory the Great, who considered him virtuous, and the statesman and author Pliny the Younger. By Trajan's death in 117 AD due to a stroke while sailing back to Rome from his Middle East campaign, the empire was in a favourable position. The third of the good emperors, Trajan's cousin and adopted successor Hadrian, was proclaimed emperor by his troops in Syria after they got the news of Trajan's death. Now, Hadrian was a break from the expansionist nature of Trajan, ruling until his death in 138 AD, and he actually saw that the empire was somewhat overstretched and beset with rebellions, struggling to hold on to newly won provinces, and thus he made a crucial decision. He implemented a new policy, deciding to withdraw from Mesopotamia and Parthia, and instead established more solid, secure borders, albeit slightly smaller ones. Perhaps the most famous example of this policy of consolidation was Hadrian's Wall, a 73-mile-long fortification stretching coast to coast in what is now northern England, then the Roman province, of course, of Britannia. This was to defend the wild and dangerous northwest frontier of the empire, and in the words of the Roman biographical work Historia Augusta, Hadrian, quote, was the first to construct a wall which was to separate the barbarians from the Romans. It featured large forts, smaller mile castles, which were forts built roughly every 1 Roman mile, and huge ditches in front and behind the wall, with smaller turrets all along it, with soldiers garrisoned across the entire length. Construction began on the wall in 122 AD, 5 years into Hadrian's reign, and was completed in just 6 years due to the work of 3 entire Roman legions, or around 15,000 men, and remains an incredible feat of engineering, still influencing the landscape of northern England today, some 1,900 years after it was built. Hadrian had previously served not only as a legatus, a general during the conquests of Dacia and Parthia, but as one of Trajan's closest allies, and had also held important offices of state, including serving as consul, an executive role of the highest honour, and 2 terms as the governor of the Roman provinces of Lower Pannonia in Eastern Europe and Syria, where he was located when Trajan died. Hadrian's reign also consisted of a lot of travelling and touring the empire, visiting Britain of course, before heading to Spain, Asia Minor, Greece, Sicily, Italy, and later lengthy tours of northern Africa, where he created another border to match what was built in Britannia and also in Germania. Domestically, Hadrian implemented what had now become the typical policies of a newly crowned emperor, revoking citizens' debts, paying for gladiatorial games and shows, and handing money to the poor. Hadrian was also highly educated and an admirer of Hellenic Greek culture and civilization, going as far as to earn him the nickname Graeculus Little Greek as a boy. It remained an enduring passion throughout his life though, and as emperor, Hadrian was keen to promote Hellenic culture, spending a whole year in Greece during his affirmation aforementioned tours, particularly Athens, which he adorned with new public buildings, including a library and an aqueduct. He also finished the vast temple of Olympian Zeus, participated in religious festivals and rituals, and significantly established the Panhellenion, a league or commonwealth of Greek city-states within the Roman Empire, believed to be Hadrian's attempt to recreate the apparent unified Greece of the 5th century BC, which fought back the Persians and symbolized the classical ideals of which he idolized. And the Panhellenion would actually go on to heavily influence culture and practices across the eastern provinces of the empire. Athens hosted the Panhellenic Games in 137 AD, and the group is believed to have endured for over a century after Hadrian's death until around 250 AD. Hadrian himself soon came to look upon his own reign as a new Augustan age. In 123 AD, he began to style himself Hadrianus Augustus, deliberately invoking the memory of his great predecessor and announcing a golden age on his coinage. After restoring the temple of Olympian Zeus, he also assumed the title Olympius. In Rome, he completely rebuilt the Pantheon, which was destroyed by a fire under Trajan's rule, and his grand mausoleum is now known as the Castel Sant'Angelo. Hadrian's final journey abroad before his death was to violently crush a rebellion in Judea after he attempted to build a new Roman city upon the ruins of Jerusalem, destroyed by the Emperor Titus 60 years earlier. The revolt lasted from 132 to 135 AD and led to the deaths of over 500,000 Jews, a remarkable outlier to the rest of Hadrian's reign, which was mostly moderate and careful according to most historians. Overall, Hadrian unified and consolidated Rome's vast empire, promoting Greek culture and becoming known as the Omnium Curiositatem Exploratori, an explorer of everything interesting, touring the empire out of his insatiable curiosity driven by a keen intellect. From 136 AD, Hadrian's health began to fail though, and after a blip of a succession crisis with the death of his first choice Commodus, he adopted Antoninus Pius, a highly respected senator, as his successor, on the condition that the childless Antoninus would in turn adopt Hadrian's promising young nephew Marcus Aurelius and Commodus's son Lucius Verus as his heirs. He died of heart failure on the 10th of July 138 AD, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant administration, stability and relative peace, but one that became somewhat unpopular and indeed feared in the last years of his rule, with a rather frosty relationship with the Senate. It was only with reluctance, for example, that the Senate approved Antoninus Pius's request to deify the dead emperor. On to Antoninus Pius, the fourth of the good emperors and the longest reigning of them all, nearly 23 years in fact, and he was widely thought of as mild-mannered and a capable leader. His family originated in Gaul and had a history of respected executive positions, with his grandfather, father and Antoninus himself serving as consul. After persuading the Senate to offer customary divine offers upon Hadrian, and for other such pious and dutiful acts, including sparing the senators who Hadrian himself had condemned to death in his ill health, the Senate also gave him the surname Pius, and when his wife Faustina died shortly into his reign in late 140 or early 141, he founded in her memory a charitable institution for the daughters of the poor. Antoninus is somewhat of an anomaly in Roman history, with the history of his reign containing no accounts of large-scale military campaigns, no rousing speeches delivered to his armies, and no periods of deprivation or excess. In fact, the years that he ruled are considered by many the very best to be alive in Roman history, and certainly the most peaceful. Much unlike his predecessor Hadrian and his travels, Antoninus remained in Italy for the entire duration of his reign, content to focus on directly managing the empire. Imperial administration under him was by all accounts particularly conservative, with a close-knit group of senatorial families working with the emperor, himself a deeply experienced politician, to oversee the running of the empire. This style of government was well received in antiquity, with late antique writers such as Aurelius Victor commending the fact that people of the empire looked upon him as more of a parent or a patron rather than a master or an emperor. Like other Roman emperors though, Antoninus Pius oversaw vast construction projects around the empire, including in Rome, with much of his work in the city itself focused on rebuilding and restoring important landmarks around the city. These included, as the Historia Augusta alleges, the Pons Sublicius, the oldest bridge across the Tiber in the city. This is a recurring theme in Antoninus's reign, notably less of the construction of ostentatious monuments and rather for those projects that benefited the imperial populace, such as the baths at Ostia and the vital arteries of imperial infrastructure, such as roads, bridges and aqueducts, those projects that were important for the general populace. Antoninus also loaned money at the lowest rate ever exacted, 4%, in order that he might use his fortune to aid many. He waged no major foreign wars against Rome's neighbours, and though there were some instances of border conflicts and several instances of violent disturbances in the empire, these were usually focused on competition between ambitious Roman administrators rather than against external threats. Antoninus's armies also contained revolts in Mauritania, Germany, Dacia and Egypt, and the only main campaign under his reign was an aggressive incursion into northern Britain. Led by Quintus Lollius Urbicus, a governor of African Numidian descent, the Romans invaded the south of Scotland and, achieving a number of notable victories, pushed back the imperial frontier 100 miles beyond that established by Hadrian's Wall. To mark this new boundary, the Antonine Wall was constructed, though only of turf, not out of stone like Hadrian's Wall, and was abandoned after only a generation because it was too expensive to manage, especially with the barren and relatively useless land at the time of southern Scotland. Some have pondered if the campaign was purely to boost Antoninus's prestige as emperor through a military victory, and many criticise him for this adventure in Britain, while simultaneously allowing the Parthians to rebuild their empire in the east. Turning to internal threats, when there was an instance of an attempted coup to usurp the throne, Antoninus actually allowed members of the Senate to dispense justice against those who had attempted to seize power. In many ways, he was the most pro-Senate emperor in Rome's history, which does make sense since he himself served there for so long. He understood that any one man trying to assume total power and ignoring the Senate would inevitably lead to disaster. Elsewhere, there were no great uprisings such as the one Hadrian had to quash in Judea, and Antoninus chose to respect the imperial strategy of his predecessor and recognise the limits of the empire. Although he didn't travel to meet his armies in person, they were kept informed of their new emperor through coinage, which was central to his reign, and indeed Antoninus left a huge economic surplus to his successors. Finally, a fun fact about Antoninus's reign, that he was the first known emperor to send a diplomatic mission to China, with a group claiming to be from Rome arriving at the court of the Han Emperor in 166 AD, which is after his death, but they were carrying gold medallions from his reign. Antoninus, fulfilling his oath to Hadrian, adopted Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus as his heirs, and with his long reign, inclination towards peace, and generally good government, this meant that he was one of those rarest of Roman emperors in being one who died of old age at 74 years old. He left the empire in very fine shape, at a height that arguably it would never reach again. The final of the 5 good emperors is my personal favourite and probably the greatest ever Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 AD during the reign of Hadrian, and as a future Roman emperor from 138 AD alongside Lucius Verus, together they enjoyed the very best education possible. Upon accession, the Senate originally attempted to offer the rule of the empire just to Marcus alone, but out of respect for Hadrian's wishes, he refused until Lucius was also given an equal share. And thus the first ever co-imperial administration was established over the Roman Empire, although the system would become more popular in the following centuries. This ended up being far from an equal share of power though, with Marcus Aurelius hugely more politically experienced, having been consul 3 times in the past, and his role as Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, showed governance of the empire was his prerogative. As the biographer of Lucius Verus wrote in Historia Augusta, quote, "Verus obeyed Marcus, as a governor obeys the emperor." Domestically, Marcus Aurelius reorganized imperial administration. While the court of Antoninus was dominated by a number of senatorial families from Italy, as I mentioned earlier, Marcus's court instead included officials from diverse regions and careers, including as far away as Pannonia on the very fringes of the empire. Having ruled alongside Antoninus for years, Marcus was a skilled political operator and is widely said to have what is called one glorious year, where he earned great goodwill for his early political reforms. He added court days to the calendar, overseeing many of the cases personally and showing a particular interest in laws managing the protection of orphans and children, the manumission of slaves, that is, the giving up of slaves, and the choosing of city officials. He showed immense respect for the Senate, asking their opinion in many matters, coming to them personally if he wished to make a proposal, and attending every meeting when he was in Rome, even staying late into the night when the elections ran long. He was frugal with imperial funds, heavily reducing games and revising taxes, but investing instead in welfare programs to support the poor. He also required wealthy officials to invest some of their fortune back into the Roman Empire, shamed informers, and ignored attempts at bribery. Indeed, the first year of rule was one of peace and prosperity, but this did not last for long. In late 161 or early 162 AD, heavy rains saw the Tiber River burst its banks in a devastating flood and caused considerable damage to the imperial capital, resulting in the death of people and livestock and a famine in Rome. Legislative details have not survived, but both co-emperors are highly praised for their personal involvement in solving the crisis, investing time and their own personal fortunes into mitigating the disaster. It is even believed that Marcus Aurelius personally walked the streets to distribute bread to his people. However, this was not the only crisis facing the co-emperors. At the same time, the Parthians had reconsolidated their strength and their king led an invasion of the Roman client kingdom of Armenia, removing their monarch and establishing his son in the position before marching further west into Roman Syria. This was unacceptable, and as the situation deteriorated in the east, Marcus Aurelius, who lacked military training himself, sent Lucius Verus to lead a renewed war with the Parthians in 162 AD. The Roman counterattack began in earnest a year later in 163, including the successful recapture of the Armenian capital of Artaxata, and although Rome instated a new king, it became required that this king be of Arsacid Parthian descent, and so the Parthian Empire successfully established the Arsacid dynasty of Armenia, while Rome kept its client state. Lucius, though, was heavily criticised for not taking an active role as he was sent to do, instead deciding to enjoy the luxuries of various eastern Mediterranean cities and seemingly remaining in Antioch for most of this initial conflict. The Parthians, spurred by their success in Armenia, turned their eyes on Mesopotamia and overthrew the Roman client king of Osroene there too. By now, though, the Romans held the initiative, and with the senior command in the hands of Gaius Ovidius Cassius, a ferocious military leader, early in 165 AD, two Roman armies marched into the Parthian Empire. One secured northern Mesopotamia after a battle at Edessa, chasing the Parthians eastward until their general fled across the Tigris River. The other main Roman force crossed the Euphrates on a bridge of boats and engaged the Parthians at Dura Europus, where they won a stunning victory. Cassius then moved down the Euphrates to its junction with the Tigris River, where the Parthian capital Ctesiphon and the huge port city of Seleucia were located. Both were sacked, despite the latter opening its gates to the Romans. Parthian king Vologases IV made peace with the Romans, with one of the terms of the settlement forcing the king to cede the territory of western Mesopotamia to the Romans, with the Senate granting both emperors high honours, despite the military command being largely done by their skilled generals. Yet once again this triumph was bittersweet, and on their return to Rome the soldiers of the Parthian campaign brought with them a devastating plague, estimated to either be measles or most likely smallpox, and one that raged so strongly throughout the empire that it killed 5 to 10 million people, the Roman Empire having about 75 million people in total over the period of the next 15 years, becoming known as the Antonine Plague. To make things even worse, Germanic tribes had been stepping up incursions into Rome's northern frontier that required suppressing, and in somewhat surprising moves, both co-emperors set out together to command the legions there. However, this was easily resolved after the tribes quickly sued for peace, and the emperors turned back after accepting that peace. Lucius, though, would not make it back to Rome. While travelling through Pannonia, he became ill and eventually died in the carriage with Marcus at his side in January 169 AD, aged 38, with Marcus mourning him deeply. Many suggest that Lucius fell victim to the Antonine plague that was very much still raging, and there is no evidence of any foul play in his death. After the harrowing task of burying his brother emperor, Marcus was soon called back to Germany to deal with the dangerous Marcomanni tribe, and wars with various Germanic tribes would continue through the remainder of Marcus's reign, many of them depicted in the exquisite triumphal column of Marcus Aurelius, which survives in Rome to this day, including the miracle of the rain, an incredible event where a Roman legion, surrounded and without water, was saved from certain annihilation by a sudden downpour of rain, while their tribal opponents were battered by the storm. After dealing with an attempted revolt in the eastern provinces by threatening to invade Egypt, Marcus accelerated the promotion of his son Commodus as his heir, which broke from the tradition of adopting the next emperor from a pool of men picked for their careers and qualities rather than just dynastic succession. Renewed Germanic rebellions in 177 AD saw Marcus travel north once more, but with the impact of the Antonine plague, many Roman legions were devastated, and the emperor had to call up additional manpower from gladiators, slaves, and even bandits. But he did eventually succeed in driving the invaders out of Roman territory again with many decisive victories, such as the Battle of Lagarico in modern Slovenia. However, Marcus grew weaker during this campaign, possibly due to the plague, and died in Vindobona, modern Vienna, Austria, in 180 AD, ending the rule of the 5 good emperors of Rome and indeed ending Pax Romana's golden age. But Marcus did leave behind an impressive legacy, becoming known as a philosopher emperor and one of the most intelligent emperors in history. During the course of his education, Marcus became captivated by what is known as Stoic philosophy, which has its roots in ancient Athens and posits that one's personal happiness comes from accepting the moment as it happens. It says that one should not allow oneself to be driven by wild emotions, but rather use logic to understand the world and one's place in it. Much of our modern understanding of this philosophy comes from the incredibly famous writings of Marcus Aurelius himself, written during his Germanic campaigns. These meditations are a series of personal reflections from his own Stoic beliefs, presented in 12 books, and include writings of his place in the universe, avoiding the excesses of emotion, and the theme of what it means to be a good man is recurrent throughout. Quote, "Put an end once and for all to this discussion of what a good man should be, and be one." For this contrast with other emperors who became known for their cruelty and debauchery, Marcus's golden reputation raises him up as a grand philosopher. With his death, the decline of the Roman Empire arguably began. Population decline due to the enduring plague and the disastrous rule of Commodus and future emperors, and as the historian Cassius Dio recounted, this must be our next topic, for our history now descends from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. Regarding the 5 good emperors, as Charles River Editor says in part of his work, The 5 Good Emperors, these 84 years witnessed an impressive growth in the size of the Roman Empire. New acquisitions ranged from northern Britain to Arabia, Mesopotamia, and Dacia. Furthermore, existing possessions were consolidated and the empire's defences improved when compared to what had come before. A range of countries that had been client states became fully integrated provinces, and even Italy saw administrative reforms which created further wealth. Throughout the empire, the policy of Romanization proved successful, at least in terms of introducing a common language, enabling standards of living to rise, and creating a political system minimizing internal strife. Overall, these 5 emperors did rule over the period of the Roman Empire, much seen as the greatest, most peaceful, and most prosperous in its history. And let me know what you think about these 5 emperors. Do you have a favourite, or perhaps one not part of this group? I'd like to know. I know many are a fan of Augustus or Octavian. Get your comments in down below, and thank you very much for tuning into this video. Leave me any suggestions for how I can improve in future videos. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.